The sound of his shoes. Part 1. The rhythm of mornings. When I was a child, the world didn't begin with sunlight or alarms or the chirping of birds. It began with the sound of my father's shoes. Every weekday morning, I would lie there in bed, eyes still closed, waiting for it, the soft creak of the floorboards, then the steady, predictable rhythm. The house was always quiet at that hour, the kind of silence that blankets the world just before dawn. But no matter how still everything else was, that sound never failed. It was my father, walking from his room to the kitchen. He always wore the same shoes, brown, cracked at the sides, laces fraying, the heels uneven from years of use. They weren't much to look at, but to me, they were like a heartbeat echoing through the house, reminding me the world was safe. I remember lying there, staring at the ceiling, counting the steps. It wasn't just a game, it was a ritual. Step, step, pause, he'd stop to glance out the kitchen window, sip his coffee, then keep going. If I heard the small sigh he always let out around step 6, I knew it meant he had a long day ahead. If he hummed a few notes of an old song, always Sinatra, it meant he'd slept well. That pause was my favorite. That pause meant he was there, alive, steady. That everything was as it should be. Some mornings I would sneak out of bed quietly, walking on my toes to avoid the squeaky tile near my door. I'd find him standing in the kitchen, mug in one hand, newspaper in the other, the soft orange glow of sunrise spilling across the countertop. He never looked surprised to see me.
"Morning, kiddo,"
he'd say without turning around. That was his version of a hug. He never made fancy breakfasts, never said things like "have a good day, sweetheart," like I heard other parents do. But he'd always leave a slice of toast for me, sometimes with a little too much butter, sometimes a little burnt. And I would eat it, grateful not for the taste but for the quiet message in it: I see you. I remembered you. I care. Looking back now, I realize those mornings were the most consistent part of my childhood. No matter what happened, bad grades, colds, fights with friends, the sound of those shoes each morning was a promise. A quiet, unspoken, unbroken promise: I'm here. There was one morning that still lingers in my mind like it happened yesterday. It was pouring rain. I had forgotten my umbrella, and I stood under the metal awning outside the school entrance, watching the downpour and feeling small. The other kids were picked up quickly, their parents rushing them into warm cars with dry towels and hot cocoa waiting. But my father was late. 10 minutes. Then 15. I tried not to cry. Told myself he probably forgot. That maybe he'd overslept. Then I saw the truck. It came crawling through the flooded street like a tired soldier returning from war. My father stepped out, holding no umbrella, just pulling his coat over his head. Rain soaked his shirt in seconds, and he didn't even flinch. He walked straight toward me, handed me his coat without a word, and put it around my shoulders. It was heavy. It smelled like coffee, dust, and something like home. He walked me back to the truck, opened the door, waited until I was inside, and only then did he climb in, completely drenched. He looked at me, gave a little smile, and said,
"Don't forget your homework next time."
That was it. He didn't complain about the rain. Didn't ask why I didn't bring my umbrella. Just drove me home as if he did it every day. I remember looking at his soaked sleeves and realizing that love doesn't always come wrapped in warmth and words. Sometimes it's silent. Sometimes it shows up in the rain, dripping and quiet, offering a coat that smells like everything safe in the world. Part 2. Quiet Love. By the time I turned 12, something began to shift, not in my father, but in me. I had started to notice the things other kids had. Their fathers were loud, full of energy and praise. They cheered from the sidelines of soccer games, brought ice cream after school plays, carried video cameras, always smiling. Mine wasn't like that. He didn't come to games. He didn't know who my friends were. He didn't take pictures or clap in public. Most days, he barely said more than a few words to me. He worked long hours as a mechanic. He'd leave before dawn, come home when the sky was already turning purple. His hands were always stained with grease, his face always tired. He smelled like oil and sawdust and something old and familiar I couldn't name. I began to mistake his silence for absence. One evening, after school, I stood outside the gym where other kids' parents were picking them up. My backpack was torn, the zipper broken. My shoes were scuffed and thin at the soles. As I waited, I overheard a classmate say,
Why does your dad always look like he works at a junkyard?
He wasn't trying to be cruel. He was just being a kid. But it stung like a slap. I didn't tell my father what was said. I just stopped inviting him to things. And yet, he never asked why. That's what made it harder. It wasn't that he didn't care, I just didn't know how he cared. Until the day I got into a fight. It wasn't really a fight, more like a one-sided beating. 3 older boys cornered me after class. They shoved me into a fence, punched me in the stomach, and laughed as I fell. I don't even remember what started it. I just remember the concrete and the ringing in my ears. I came home with a split lip and dirt on my knees. I told my mom I tripped. She pressed a warm cloth to my mouth, gave me a half smile, and didn't press for more. That night, my father didn't say a word about it. He sat at the table, eating quietly, his eyes distant. The next morning, I woke up to the usual rhythm of his shoes. Across the hallway. But then the sound stopped, early. Too early. I sat up in bed, listening. Silence. I walked out into the hallway. The front door was open. The truck was gone. He had left earlier than usual. At school, I was called into the principal's office during lunch. I panicked, thinking maybe someone had told them about the fight. But instead, the principal gave me an odd look and said,
Your father came by this morning. Just wanted to check on something.
That was all he said. But I knew. I don't know what my dad said, or if he even raised his voice. But those boys never touched me again. That night, when I came home, there was a paper bag on the kitchen table. Inside were new shoes. Not expensive ones, but they were clean and fit perfectly. A note was tucked inside. I don't always know how to help. But I'm trying. Dad. It was the first time he had ever written me anything. Later that week, on a Saturday, he surprised me by walking into my room holding a toolbox.
Want to help fix the back steps?
He asked, almost awkwardly. I shrugged, unsure. He handed me gloves that were clearly too big and led me outside. We worked in silence most of the morning. I held nails while he hammered. He showed me how to measure twice, cut once. He never praised me. Never said good job. But every time he handed me the next piece of wood, his eyes softened. When we were done, he stood back, wiped his brow, and said,
Not bad.
I smiled for the first time in what felt like weeks. That became our thing, fixing things. Broken fence panels. A leaky pipe. A squeaky drawer. Every time, he'd call me over without fanfare, hand me a tool, and say,
Let's see what we can do.
He never asked about my day. Never pried. But he listened in his own way, through long afternoons with the radio playing quietly, sawdust in the air, and our hands busy building or mending something no one else would ever see. Still, part of me wished he would say more. One evening, I finally asked, Why don't you ever come to my school stuff? Like, performances? Or open house? He didn't look up from his bowl of soup. Just stirred it slowly.
I'm not good with crowds.
He said after a moment.
Never have been. Makes me feel small.
It was the first time I'd ever heard him admit fear. Then he added,
Your mom's the brave one. She likes people. I like fixing things.
I didn't know what to say to that. So I said nothing. A few nights later, I found something strange in the garage. It was a small box, tucked behind an old workbench, full of programs from school plays, football games, and awards nights, most of which I never saw him attend. On each, there were tiny marks in pencil. Stars next to my name. Circles around my photo. He had been there. Hiding in the back. Watching quietly. That night, I lay in bed, thinking about all the times I thought he hadn't shown up. All the mornings I'd tuned out the sound of his shoes. All the silences I'd mistaken for indifference. And then I heard them again. Across the hallway. They were slower now, heavier. But they were still steady. Just like him.